My father, Dale Harmon, managed rental properties. Not his own, other people's. Landlords who owned anywhere from 2 units to 12 and didn't want to deal with tenants, contractors, or the paperwork that comes from treating housing like a business. For a flat monthly fee plus a percentage of collected rents, his company, Harmon Property Group, handled everything. Lease agreements, maintenance requests, rent collection, move-in inspections, vendor coordination. On paper, it was a professional operation. On paper, it looked organized. I had moved back home 3 years earlier after a job relocation fell through. The plan was 4 months, maybe 6. I had savings, a freelance client base doing IT systems work, and what I believed was a functional relationship with my father. He had been a single parent since I was 16, when my mother left and didn't come back. We had managed. Not warmly, not easily, but we had managed. Moving back seemed like a reasonable temporary arrangement. Within 3 weeks, I understood what I had actually moved into. My father's business ran on a property management software platform called Buildium. Tenant portals, automated rent reminders, maintenance ticketing, vendor payment processing, document storage, lease renewal alerts. It is a solid platform when it is set up correctly and maintained consistently. My father had bought the subscription 2 years before I came home and had used maybe 30% of what it could do, because the remaining 70% required someone who understood systems and was willing to sit with it. The night I saw him at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock, staring at a laptop screen like it had personally insulted him, I made the mistake of asking what was wrong. Tenant in Unit 4 was a month past due. The automated reminder hadn't gone out because the email integration had broken when Buildium pushed an update and nobody had re-authenticated the account. My father didn't know that. He just knew the reminder didn't send, and now he had an awkward conversation to have that he believed he could have avoided. I fixed it in 20 minutes. Re-authenticated the connection, triggered a manual reminder, set up a monitoring alert so it wouldn't break silently again. He watched over my shoulder and said, "You're good at this stuff." That was the most acknowledgement I ever got. After that, it became a pattern so gradual I didn't notice how deep I was in until I was standing at the bottom of it. The Buildium subscription renewed every year $328, in my name on my card, because my father had put it there temporarily during a cash flow week and never changed it back. The contractor scheduling system he used, a separate tool called Service Trade, was also connected through my personal email because I had set up the integration and it was easier to leave it. The tenant communication templates I had rebuilt from scratch when his originals were so poorly written that 2 tenants in the same week had asked if the notices were jokes. Those lived in a shared drive folder I maintained. For 3 years, I was the invisible infrastructure of Harmon Property Group. I handled 12 properties across 4 landlord clients. I built a maintenance tracker that cut his contractor response time from 4 days to under 24 hours, which sounds minor until you understand that delayed repairs are how landlords lose tenants, and lost tenants are how property managers lose clients. I negotiated a volume arrangement with a local plumbing company that saved his 3 biggest clients an average of $1,100 per year in call-out fees. I managed the month-end reporting packets formatted, summarized, sent that his landlord clients received on the 1st of every month without fail because his clients had learned to expect them and would have noticed immediately if they stopped. I never invoiced him. Not once. I paid $340 a year in software subscriptions that ran his business. I worked evenings and weekend mornings when tenant issues surfaced. I once spent 4 hours on a Saturday rebuilding a lease database after a corrupted file threatened to make 6 active agreements unrecoverable. My father went to a college football watch party that Saturday. He came home and said, "Oh, you fixed it? Nice." He told people I lived at home because I hadn't figured out my career yet. He said it in the particular tone people use when they want you to feel grateful for a generosity they are performing in public. He never told anyone that the business sending him $6,200 a month in management fees ran on systems I built and maintained and paid for. His girlfriend Sandra arrived in August of last year. She was pleasant in the particular way that people are pleasant when they are deciding something about you and haven't announced it yet. She had opinions about living arrangements and adult children and what she called enabling, which is a word people reach for when someone else's family structure makes them uncomfortable and they want it rearranged. She told my father, in a conversation I was not supposed to hear but did hear through a shared wall at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, that I was too comfortable, that I would never leave if there were no consequences, that it wasn't fair to either of us for him to keep subsidizing my drift. Drift. 3 years of invisible labor, and the word she had for it was drift. My father said, "She does help around the house." Sandra said, "She's almost 30. She should be helping her own house." He didn't argue after that. And I knew, standing in my bedroom with my back against the wall listening to the shape of my future being discussed without me, that the clock had started. I just didn't know how little time was left on it. The week before the locks changed was the kind of week that feels almost normal until you look back at it and realize every single day had a warning in it that you talked yourself out of noticing. Monday, Sandra was at the house when I got home from a client meeting. That was unusual. She didn't live there. She had her own place across town. But she was at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and the particular relaxed posture of someone who has already decided she belongs in a room. She asked how my day was in the voice people use when they're not interested in the answer. I said fine and went to my room. Tuesday, my father stopped asking me about a maintenance situation he'd mentioned the previous Friday. He had 3 units where a landlord client wanted a full maintenance audit ahead of a potential sale. He had asked me to pull the records and draft a summary. I had started it. But on Tuesday, he didn't ask about it. He didn't bring it up at dinner. I thought maybe the client had delayed. I finished the draft anyway and saved it to the shared folder. Wednesday, he came into the kitchen while I was working and stood near the coffee maker in the way people stand near things when they have something to say and are deciding whether to say it. I waited. He poured his coffee. Then he said, "Sandra and I have been talking about some changes around here." I said, "Okay." He said, "Nothing definite yet, just talking." Then he took his coffee and left. I should have pushed. I know that now. But families like mine run on the unspoken agreement that as long as no one names the difficult thing directly, everyone gets to pretend it isn't there. I had lived inside that agreement for years. I was still living inside it on Wednesday night when I stayed up until midnight finishing a month-end reporting packet for the landlord with the largest portfolio, 3 properties, 11 units, the kind of client who generated enough revenue that losing him would have hurt the business noticeably. I sent the packet, got a reply at 7 a.m. Thursday that said, simply, "Perfect as always. Thanks." My father was already gone by the time I came down Thursday morning. He left early on the weeks when Sandra stayed over at her place because he liked to stop at her neighborhood coffee shop on the way to his first property visit. I remember thinking the house felt quieter than usual and telling myself that was a good thing. Quiet meant no friction. Quiet meant another day. I packed my work bag. I put the soup container in it, leftover chicken and rice I'd made Sunday. I told myself I'd come home, finish the contractor invoice I owed one of his vendors, and watch something low stakes until I fell asleep. I thought about the maintenance audit I drafted. I thought about the tenant in Unit 7 who'd been texting about the ceiling. I texted the plumber we used for that building and flagged it as priority. I thought about the Buildium annual renewal coming up in 6 weeks, whether I should finally move it to his card, whether that conversation would go anywhere. I did not think about the locks. It didn't occur to me that a man whose business I was holding together would consider removing me from the building on a Thursday afternoon while I was at work. It didn't occur to me because it was irrational, because people who depend on you do not typically lock you out when they still need what you carry. That is the thing about being invisible for so long inside a system. The person running the system starts to believe the system runs itself. I drove to my client, sat through a 4-hour infrastructure review, ate half the soup for lunch, and drove home at 6:48 in the evening, already composing the contractor email in my head. My key went in the lock and stopped. He didn't come to the door right away. For maybe 20 seconds I was alone on that porch, key in hand, trying to make the physical fact in front of me match anything logical. I tried the key again. Same result. I stepped back and looked at the lock itself. New brass plate. The screws still looked slightly raw at the edges, the small scratches of a same-day installation. That was when I understood. Not a mistake. Not a stuck mechanism. A decision. He appeared in the sidelight panel, that narrow strip of glass beside the front door that lets you see who's there before you open it. He was in his gray hoodie, arms folded across his chest, the expression on his face not angry exactly, more like resolved, like a man who had been coached through a difficult moment and was now executing the plan. I looked at him through the glass. He looked back at me. I said, "What is this?" He said, "Through the door, not opening it. I had the locks changed this afternoon." I waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. "Why?" I said. "Because Sandra and I agreed it was time. You need to be on your own, and this was never going to happen as long as you were comfortable here." I asked him where I was supposed to go tonight. He said he assumed I had money saved. He said it in the tone of someone who has rehearsed this part and found the version that feels least like cruelty. He said there were hotels nearby and I could take some time to sort out a more permanent plan. He said he'd have a box of my things on the porch by Friday morning and that I could text him a list if there was something specific I needed right away. A box. Friday morning. I could text him a list. He spoke about my life, my things, my timeline, my next steps through a panel of glass without opening the door, without offering me a glass of water, without looking particularly troubled by any of it. Sandra had decided this was enabling. My father had agreed. The locksmith had come at 2 in the afternoon. The neighbor's ring camera would later show, and been done by 3. My father had then, according to his own account when we eventually spoke, gone to Sandra's for dinner, returned at 6, and was simply waiting to see when I would show up. He had timed it for when I was at work. That detail is the one I've thought about the most since. Not the lock itself. Not even the glass panel. The timing. He did it when I wasn't home because it was easier that way. He didn't want a conversation. He wanted a result. He wanted to come home to a situation that had already been decided, so there was nothing left to negotiate. I asked him one more question through the glass. I asked whether he needed anything from me for the contractor invoice, the one due to the plumber by end of week, or whether he had already handled that. He blinked. Just slightly. The first crack in the resolved expression. "I'll handle it," he said. "Okay," I said. That was the last word I said to him on that porch. I turned around, walked to my car, placed my bag in the passenger seat next to what was left of the soup, and sat for a moment in the driveway looking at the house where I had spent 3 years making an invisible machine run. I wasn't devastated the way I might have expected to be. I was something quieter and more clarifying than that. I was looking at a situation with the same eyes I used at work, the ones that don't ask why a system failed. They ask what failing to maintain it will actually cost. I thought about the Buildium subscription, my card, my email, my authentication credentials for every integrated tool in the stack. I thought about the service trade account where all active contractor relationships lived: the plumber, the electrician, the property inspector, the HVAC tech. All of it routed through the email address that was mine. I thought about the shared drive folder, the lease templates, the reporting packets, the maintenance audit I'd drafted that week, the vendor contact list I'd spent 2 months building into something actually useful. I thought about the month-end cycle. It was March 5th. Automated rent reminders were scheduled to go out on the 7th. I had set those up. I maintained the list. I was the one who caught, 2 months earlier, that a new tenant hadn't been added to the distribution and would have been skipped entirely if I hadn't checked the queue. My father believed he ran a property management company. What he actually ran was my tolerance for being taken for granted, packaged as a business. I started the car. He was watching from the window. I could see him in the rearview mirror as I backed out, still in the doorway now, door slightly open, watching me go with that same resolved expression starting to loosen just slightly at the edges. Maybe wondering why I hadn't argued more. Maybe already talking himself into interpreting my calm as agreement. His phone was going to start ringing in about 14 hours. He didn't know that yet, but I did. I drove to the Marriott on the highway, took a room on the 3rd floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened my laptop. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I opened the Buildium administrative portal, navigated to account settings, and began. Not revenge. Documentation. There is a difference, and it matters. Revenge is emotional and imprecise. What I was doing was the same thing I did at work every time a system was handed over from one owner to another. I was making sure I understood completely and specifically what I was in control of, what I owned, what would stop functioning the moment my access was removed. By midnight, I had a list. It was longer than I'd expected. It was much, much longer than my father had any idea it would be. The hotel room was clean and anonymous in the way hotel rooms always are, which that night felt like a mercy. No evidence of anyone else's life on the walls. No family photographs. No casually cruel silences embedded in the furniture. I ordered delivery a sandwich, a bottle of water, something my body needed even if my brain wasn't registering hunger, and I sat at the small desk by the window with my laptop open and worked through what I had, methodically and without emotion, the way you process a system migration at work. Step by step. Asset by asset. Access by access. The Buildium account. Subscription holder, me. Primary admin credentials, mine. The account had 4 landlord-client portfolios attached, 12 properties in total, 63 active tenants, 11 open maintenance tickets, and the March rent reminder cycle scheduled to trigger in 41 hours. My father was listed as a secondary user with limited permissions because I had set it up that way 3 years ago when I was still believing the arrangement was temporary and wanted to make sure I could hand it off cleanly when I left. I had just never left. The service trade account, contractor scheduling, maintenance history, vendor contact records. Set up through my personal email as the account owner. My father's email was listed as a notification recipient, not an administrator. The HVAC technician, the electrician, the property inspector, the plumber we used for the eastern cluster of units, all of them had been on board through this system. All of their service histories, their rates, their preferred scheduling windows, their direct contacts beyond the office line, all of it lived in this account, accessible through me. The shared Google Drive folder, Harmon Property Group operations. Every lease template. Every month-end reporting packet going back 2 years. The maintenance audit draft I had finished Wednesday night. The landlord-client onboarding documents. The vendor rate sheet I had negotiated and formatted. My father had been shared into this folder as a viewer. He had opened it by the access logs 41 times in 3 years. Mostly to retrieve documents I had already told him were there. There was also the matter of the plumber invoice. Due Friday. $1,340 for work completed the previous week on 2 units. I had drafted the approval email on Wednesday and it was sitting in my outbox scheduled to send Thursday morning. I went into my email, opened the draft, and deleted it. Not vindicatively, just accurately. It was my email account. The approval was mine to send or not send. I was no longer employed, formally or informally, by Harmon Property Group. I did not touch the Buildium account that night. I did not cancel anything. I did not delete anything. I want to be precise about this because it matters for what came later. I didn't sabotage. I simply stopped. There is a difference between destroying a machine and walking away from one. I walked away. What happened after was the machine being exactly what it always was without the person who had been maintaining it. I transferred the Buildium subscription billing to a backup card in my name so the subscription itself wouldn't lapse on him. That was not generosity. That was precision. I didn't want the platform to go down because of a billing failure. I wanted him to be able to see, clearly and without interruption, exactly what was happening when I stopped managing it. Then I closed my laptop, brushed my teeth, and went to sleep. I slept well. That surprised me at the time and doesn't anymore. People who have been quietly carrying weight for years often sleep very well the first night they put it down. Your body knows before your brain does that something has shifted. I woke at 6:47. Got coffee from the lobby. Came back upstairs. Sat in the chair by the window and watched the parking lot fill up the way hotel parking lots do on weekday mornings, with people who looked like they were going somewhere specific and knew exactly how to get there. My phone buzzed at 7:11. A text from my father. Box is on the porch. Let me know when you want to pick it up. I set the phone face down on the desk and drank my coffee. At 7:34, the platform sent its automated daily digest to the account owner me, flagging 2 new maintenance tickets submitted overnight. Unit 7, the leaking ceiling I had flagged to the plumber the day before, had escalated. The tenant had woken up to water on the floor. She had submitted a new ticket marked urgent, attached 3 photos, and noted she had already emailed the landlord directly because she hadn't heard anything in 24 hours. That landlord client would now be aware, before my father's workday had even started. that there was an urgent open ticket receiving no response. My father would not see the escalation alert. The alert went to the account owner's email. My email. I noted it. I did not forward it. I did not call the plumber. I did not send my father a heads up. I opened my laptop and drafted a message to my 2 primary freelance clients letting them know I was updating my working address and would be operating remotely from temporary accommodation for the next few weeks. Professional. Simple. They both replied within an hour to say that was fine. And did I need anything? That question, did I need anything, landed differently than it usually would have. I had spent 3 years inside a household where that question was never asked of me, where my needs were assumed to be covered because I was present, or assumed to be irrelevant because I was quiet about them. At 8:52, my father called for the first time. I let it ring. The call started casual, the way they always do when someone believes the problem is a misunderstanding that a quick conversation will resolve. 1. Call at 8:52. A voicemail I didn't listen to yet. Another call at 9:17. No voicemail that time. At 9:40, a text. I need you to log into the system. Something's wrong with the reminders. I understood exactly what had happened. The March rent reminder cycle was scheduled for the 7th, but the setup required someone to manually confirm the tenant list each month, a step I had built in as a check after a near miss early on. My father didn't know that step existed. He had never done it. In 3 years, I had done it every single month without mentioning it, because mentioning it would have required explaining a system he wasn't interested in learning. Without confirmation, the reminder batch would either send to a stale list missing 2 tenants added in January and 1 updated email address from February, or it would hold and flag for review. Either way, something visible would go wrong at the start of the payment cycle. I did not reply to the text. 10:15, my father called again. I watched the phone screen light up and go dark and light up and go dark. He called 4 times in 11 minutes. The 4th time, he left a voicemail. I listened to it at 10:30. He said, "Hey, call me back. There's some kind of issue with the reminder system. Clients are getting duplicates or not getting them at all. I'm not sure, I can't find where to look at it. Also, the plumber just emailed saying he didn't get the invoice approval and he needs it by end of day or he's going to hold the job on Unit 7. Call me." I replayed it once. Then I set my phone face down and went back to my laptop. I want to describe what happened next as precisely as I can because it is easy to assume this was some kind of satisfaction. It was not, or not only that. It was something more like watching a weather system that had been building for 3 years finally make contact with the ground. Not glee. Recognition. Of course it was the plumber first. Of course it was the reminder cycle. Of course it was Unit 7, the one I had flagged, tried to route, tried to handle on the last day I was still inside the system. By 11, the texts had changed in tone. The first few had been instructional login, check this, fix that, as if I were a service technician who had failed to show up and needed redirecting. By 11, the instruction was gone and something rawer had taken its place. 11:04. The Hendersons called me. The landlord. They said the tenant in Unit 7 emailed them directly. "This is a problem. Call me back, please." 11:19. "I don't have the plumber's direct number. It's in your system. I need it." 11:31. "I cannot get into service trade. It's asking for a login I don't have." That last one I read twice. He had never tried to log into service trade directly because he had never needed to. Whenever he needed a contractor, he asked me to schedule them. Whenever he needed a service history for an insurance claim or a landlord question, I pulled it. The idea that the platform existed as its own independent system requiring credentials he did not possess that had never registered as a vulnerability because I had always been the person holding the access. I texted back exactly 1 sentence. "That account is under my credentials. You're not set up as a user." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. He wrote, "How do I get in?" No question mark. Which told me more about his state of mind than any punctuation could. I wrote, "You'd need to be added by the account owner." "That's me." He called immediately. I let it go to voicemail. By noon, 3 things had compounded simultaneously in the way disasters only do when the person who was preventing them stops showing up. The plumber had put the Unit 7 job on hold pending invoice approval. The Henderson landlord had called my father twice and was, according to a forwarded email he sent me at 12:17 in what appeared to be a panic, reassessing whether current management arrangements are meeting expectations. The rent reminder batch had partially sent to 21 of the 24 tenants on the active roster, skipping the 3 whose records hadn't been updated since January, and one of the skipped tenants happened to be in the Henderson portfolio, which meant the Hendersons now had both an unresolved maintenance complaint and a tenant who hadn't received a March rent reminder on the same morning. My father sent me the forwarded Henderson email without any message attached. Just the forward. Like I was still a person on his team who handled things. I read it. I did not reply. At 1:45, Sandra called me. I stared at her name on the screen for a moment, surprised, then not surprised, and let it go to voicemail. She left one. Her voice was level. She said she understood I was upset about the living situation and that she hoped I could separate my personal feelings from the business side of things. She said she was sure my father and I could work out something reasonable. Then she said, "I think you know that holding the business hostage isn't going to help anyone." Hostage. I had walked out of a house where my key no longer worked and hadn't touched a single system, hadn't deleted a single file, hadn't made a single call to a single vendor to interfere with a single active job. I had simply stopped doing, for 20 hours, what I had been doing every day for 3 years without being asked, without being compensated, and without being acknowledged. The business wasn't being held hostage. The business was experiencing, for the first time, what it actually looked like without me in it. I did not call Sandra back. The calls from my father reached 11 by 3 in the afternoon. At 3:42, he left a voicemail that ran 4 minutes and 17 seconds, the longest he had ever left me, including the time he called to say my grandmother had passed. He went through the Henderson situation, the plumber, the reminder issue, a contractor for another property who had emailed asking why a scheduled job hadn't been confirmed in the system, and a landlord client named Pierce who managed 4 units and had called to make sure the March reporting cycle was still on track. It was March 6th. The March report wasn't due until April 1st. But Pierce, who had received a perfectly formatted, punctual report every single month for 2.5 years, was already calling to check. That was the thing about reliability. People notice its presence only when they start suspecting its absence. At 4:15, my father sent one final text. 5 words. "I'm coming to find you." I looked out the hotel window, thought about how that sentence was supposed to feel like authority, how 6 months ago it might have. I texted back the hotel name and my room number, not because I was afraid of being found, because I wanted him to drive here and walk through a lobby and knock on a door he hadn't changed the lock on. I wanted him to come to me in a place I had chosen, for once in the history of our relationship. He arrived at 5:08. I watched his truck pull in from the 3rd-floor window. He parked crooked 2 feet from the line. Hurried people park crooked. He did not come upstairs. He called me from the parking lot. When I didn't answer, he texted, "I'm outside. Come down." I put on my shoes, took my key card, and rode the elevator down. He was standing at the edge of the lot near the planters by the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, the resolved expression from the night before completely gone. He looked like a man who had spent the day discovering that the floor was thinner than he thought. I stopped about 4 feet from him. I said, "Before you say anything, how many things went wrong today?" He closed his mouth. Then, "That's not the point." "How many?" I said. A long pause. "Several." I nodded. "Okay," I said. "Now we can talk." We didn't go inside. He didn't ask and I didn't offer. We stood in that parking lot at 5 in the afternoon in early March with the cold working through both our jackets, and we had the most honest conversation we had ever had in our lives. He started with the practical because that was where he was most comfortable. He said the Henderson account was at risk. He said the plumber was threatening to add a delay fee if the invoice sat unapproved past Friday morning. He said he couldn't get into service trade and had 4 active contractors in that system and no direct way to reach half of them because their numbers were in there, not in his phone. He said the reminder issue was fixable, he thought, if I could just walk him through it. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "How long do you think I've been managing those things?" He said, "You've been helping out." "I know that." "Helping out," I repeated. He shifted his weight. "You know what I mean." I said I didn't, actually. I asked him to tell me specifically what he thought I had been doing for the past 3 years. Not in general terms. Specifically. He said I handled the computer stuff, the systems, the reminders and that kind of thing. I said, I managed 12 properties, 63 active tenants, 11 contractors across 4 trades, 2 software platforms, both in my name, one of which I've been paying $328 a year for. I built your reporting templates from scratch. I rewrote every landlord communication you sent in the last 18 months because looking them over wasn't enough. I caught a missed permit renewal in 2022 that would have cost you the Pierce account. I negotiated a volume deal with the plumber that saves your 3 biggest clients a combined $3,300 a year. I did all of this without a title, without a paycheck, and without once asking you to acknowledge it in front of anyone. He was very still. The computer stuff, I said again, quietly, not angry, just returning it to him at the right size. He looked away toward the road. A truck went by. Then he said, Sandra thought. I know what Sandra thought, I said. Sandra doesn't run your business. She didn't know what she was looking at. That's not her fault. You didn't tell her. That landed harder than I expected. He flinched slightly, and I understood it was the precise truth he hadn't wanted said out loud. He had let Sandra form an opinion of me based on what she could see a woman in her late 20s living in her father's house, working from a laptop, not paying rent. He had never corrected that picture. Not because he was malicious, but because the corrected picture required him to admit something he had never wanted to name. That the business he presented to clients as his professional operation ran, in significant part, on the unpaid labor of the daughter he had called a dependent. He said, I didn't think it would. He stopped. You didn't think it would matter, I finished, because you didn't know how much of it there was. I knew some of it. You knew the parts you could see. You didn't know the parts one handled before they became visible. He rubbed the back of his neck. The Henderson thing is bad. If they pull the account, I know, I said. They're your largest client. Is there something you can do? Not quite a question. The sentence of a man who has arrived at a destination he doesn't know how to name. He couldn't say please. He couldn't say I was wrong. He could only angle toward what he needed and hope I would move toward it. I said, I'm going to tell you what I can do, and what I won't. He went still again. That particular attention people have when they realize the ground rules have changed. I can send the plumber invoice approval tonight so the job doesn't get a delay fee. I can fix the reminder list so the 3 missed tenants get the March notice before it matters. I can put together a document walking you through the service trade login process so you're not locked out of your own contractor records. I can make sure the Pierce report goes out April 1st the same way it always has. He exhaled. Something in his shoulders lowered. But, I said, I'm doing those things because 63 tenants and 4 landlord clients didn't make the decision to change those locks. They're not the ones who stood behind a glass panel and handed me a box and called it a lesson. I'm not going to let them get hurt by something that has nothing to do with theme. He nodded slowly. What I won't do, I said, is go back to what we had. I won't manage your business for free from your house or from a hotel room or from anywhere else. I won't be the person who catches the permit renewals, rewrites your emails, maintains the systems you don't understand, and doesn't exist in your description of your own company. He said, Can pay you. I know you can. That's not a conversation for tonight. Then what is? I looked at him for a moment. My father, not a cruel man, not really, just a man who had built a comfortable mythology around himself and needed someone small enough to prop it up from below. Who had let a woman he'd known 7 months tell him his own daughter was a problem without correcting her once. Who had sent a locksmith on a Thursday afternoon and then gone to dinner. I said, I want you to say out loud what you actually did yesterday. A long silence. The cold had found the gap between my collar and my hair. The parking lot lights came on that early evening flicker before they settle. He said, I locked you out. Without warning. Without warning. While I was at work. A beat. While you were at work. And you told me through the glass, I said. You didn't open the door. He looked at the ground. I didn't open the door. That was the most honest I had ever heard him. Not sorry he wasn't there yet, maybe never would be, and I had stopped needing it from him somewhere in the middle of the drive to the hotel the night before. But honest. Just the facts of what he had done, in his own voice with nobody behind glass. I said, I'm going to go upstairs and send the plumber approval and fix the reminder list. Tomorrow I'll have the service trade document ready. The Hendersons, you need to call them yourself tonight. Not email. Call. Tell them the issue has been identified and is being resolved. You don't have to explain anything else. He nodded. The rest of it, what you pay me, what this looks like going forward, if there is a going forward, that's a different conversation. And I'm not having it in a parking lot. He said my name. Just once. The way parents say a name when they've run out of other words. I said, go call the Hendersons, Dad. Then I turned around and walked back into the hotel. I did not look back. Not because I was being dramatic. Because I had said everything I intended to say, and there was nothing left in that parking lot worth standing in the cold for. Upstairs, I sent the plumber approval. I fixed the reminder list. I made a note to draft the service trade document in the morning. Then I ordered dinner, sat by the window, and watched the parking lot until my father's truck pulled out and turned toward the highway. He had come to my door this time. He had not been let in. That distinction was small, and it was everything. I found a one-bedroom apartment 11 days later. Signed the lease on a Tuesday. Moved in that Friday with 2 carloads and the particular lightness of someone who has stopped carrying something too heavy to name until it was gone. My father and I eventually had the other conversation, the one about what going forward would look like. It took 3 weeks and 2 failed attempts before either of us could sit in the same room without the weight of the parking lot between us. In the end, I contracted back to Harmon Property Group at a flat monthly rate of $2,100. Formal agreement. Scope of work defined. Invoice on the 1st. Payment due within 15 days. He signed it without negotiating the number, which told me he had finally done the math on what the alternative cost him. Sandra is still around. We are civil in the way people are civil when both sides have decided the truth has already been spoken and there is nothing left worth reopening. She does not have opinions about my living arrangements anymore. I noticed that. The Hendersons stayed. The plumber got paid. The March reminder cycle went out complete. Pierce received his April report on time, same as always. From the outside, Harmon Property Group looked exactly as it always had: organized, reliable, professionally managed. The only thing that changed was that the person making it look that way now had a contract that said so. What I let go of was harder to name than any of that. I let go of the version of my father I had been working toward for 3 years, the one who would eventually notice, eventually say it, eventually see what I had been quietly building for him and find the words. That man was not coming. What I had instead was the one who stood in a cold parking lot and said the true thing when there was nothing left to hide behind. That was not nothing. It was just smaller than I had hoped for, and I had to decide if smaller was enough to build on. Most mornings now I make coffee in my own kitchen, open my laptop, and do the work I was always good at for clients who pay me, on terms I set, in a space no one can change the locks on. Some nights I think about that glass panel. My face on one side, his on the other. The key that didn't turn. People show you the door long before they change the lock. They show you in the words they use for what you do, in the way they describe you to people who've never met you, in the silences they keep when someone reduces you and they decide silence is easier than the truth. The lock was just the first time it was written in brass. If you watched this far, you already know this story hit different. If you want more stories like this one, real ones, the kind people are afraid to tell, they're on your screen right now. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.